All right, let's go to Saturday. Stanford and Clemson. We've got Clemson 21.5-point home favorites, 57.5 the total in this game. Over for me. Over for me in this game. I think Clemson's suddenly an over team. I mean, let's be honest about where things stand with Clemson right now and their offense. Other than the Georgia game, which of course people held over their heads for a good period of time because it was that bad for Clemson's offense, for Cade Klubnik and that entire group against Georgia. Since that time, they've been almost unstoppable. Now, can you poke holes in the opponents? Yes. 66 points against an App State team that just got absolutely destroyed and lit up on their home field on a Thursday night last week by South Alabama for 48 points. There's no question it doesn't look as good now, putting up a 66 spot on App State after seeing what App State did on defense against South Alabama. That was atrocious from the Mountaineers of App State last week at home in a national TV game, standalone Thursday night against South Alabama. That was embarrassing defense. That you could make a case that after North Carolina, the next worst defensive performance last week in college football was App State. It was that bad. Gio Lopez was just cooking them in that game, roasting them. They couldn't stop anything through the air, on the ground. So that takes some shine off that Clemson 66-point performance. But they responded and put up another huge number against what was supposed to be a great NC State defense on Saturday. 24 first downs, over 500 total yards, and that's a Clemson offense that was kind to NC State in the second half. Once that game got to 52-7 early in the third quarter, Dabo called the dogs off. He was very, very respectful to Dave Doran and NC State. He knew that team was down to their backup quarterback, that he was struggling mightily in that game on the road in Death Valley. We're already up 52-7. Let's just coast our way to the finish line, and that's what happened. Klubnik comes out of the game, and they end up going to Christopher Vizina the rest of the game at quarterback. Yeah, it was a rough day for CJ Bailey, rough day for the offense overall, and at least in the first half. Then Clemson put in a lot of second and third stringers in the fourth quarter of that game, and then we started to see NC State's offense work. But I'd consider the 3 touchdowns NC State put up in the fourth quarter pretty much garbage time. Clemson had already, we're going to win this game. Who cares? Let's move on to this one here against Stanford. But the bottom line is, you can quibble about App State. NC State's supposed to be solid on defense this year, or at least was supposed to be. And even I can say now NC State's defense has been a disappointment. That being said, there is still some level of, wow, that's really impressive to have to come out of that game with that kind of take. It's still pretty damn impressive to have 52 points on the board by the 9-minute mark of the third quarter for Clemson's offense. Remember, Clemson's offense that everyone thought, here we go again, same old Clemson offense this year after the Georgia game. Well, they've clearly figured it out. Klubnik's been on fire. 16 for 24, 209 through the air, 3 touchdowns against NC State. Phil Maffa, balanced attack, 107 rushing yards as well in that game. The receiving corps has really stepped up, played a lot better so far as well with Adam Randall, Antonio Williams, who had 2 touchdowns. DJ Moore, the tight end. I like the tight end, Jake Brenningstool. He's been good. And look, they're definitely finding their footing on offense here. And they could probably score points here. Like Stanford's defense is still, I don't know, it's not bad, but it's not great. Although I'll give them all the credit in the world. They really bottled up a very good Syracuse offense for most of that game Friday night. That was a great win for Troy Taylor, for the Stanford Cardinal, 26-24 on the road, outright as underdogs against Syracuse. Very solid game from really the run game. Chris Davis, Micah Ford, Ashton Daniels. Shout out to my fellow Canadian, Elick Ayalmanor for the Stanford Cardinal. He has some kind of future ahead of him. This guy could play in the NFL, I think. The catch he made, one hand, against Syracuse on Friday night was absolutely outstanding. No question about that. It's a situation where Stanford has an offense this year, in my opinion, a pretty solid one. When you've got potentially an NFL-bound receiver like A.O. Manor to go with, Medicine Hat, Alberta's finest, and he's one heck of a receiver for this Stanford team. It's pretty impressive. And then you've got Cisse, you've got Sam Roush, you've got other receivers there that can make plays for this team, and they haven't even gotten much out of Tiger Bachmeier. He was supposed to be one of the better receivers for this team. Really hasn't gotten much going yet. Daniels can throw it. Daniels has some mobility as well in the pocket. It's a solid Stanford defense, or Stanford offense, I should say. The defense, it was really good against Syracuse, but you also have to remember it's also a defense that got picked apart by TCU. Is Clemson capable of doing that as well for them in this game? That's going to end up being the question. Yeah, Justin McElvey, get out of here. I mean, I'm not reading off anything. So, but we appreciate you joining. You're the one watching, so thank you for joining us here on Hitting the Books. Meanwhile, as far as Stanford Clemson goes, I like the over here in this game. Like I said, I'm buying into Clemson. Getting things going offensively here in this game. We've seen it 2 weeks in a row against App State and NC State. Stanford now on the road too for a second week in a row. You have to factor that in. I'm going to have to look to see if they went. I got to assume they went back home to Stanford, to Palo Alto. I don't know if they would stay on the East Coast. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but I think it's a situation here where Clemson is going to be able to move the football, put up points against this Stanford team. And on the flip side, I think Stanford can do enough offensively. And even if this is a game like last week where Clemson gets up big against Stanford like they did against NC State, we already saw, we'll put the backups in on defense and we'll let the other team score some points in garbage time. We have no issues doing that. So I like over 57.5. I think that's the way to go about it with this game between Stanford and Clemson. I'm not really looking to step in front of this Clemson freight train that we've seen all of a sudden, but Stanford's a good underdog. Be careful with Stanford when they're getting points. I've said coming into the year, I thought Stanford, when they're getting points, they're going to be a team you're going to be able to make some money with. They covered as an underdog in week 1 in their loss to TCU. We saw them 9-point dog at Syracuse last week. They win outright. I think it's going to be a spot for – be careful with this one. I know Clemson and Cade Klubnik are lighting it up the last 2 weeks, but this is a Stanford team that is, I think, going to be a pretty good and profitable underdog against the spread this year. And we've already seen them twice in the dog roll this year get the money both times, 2-0 against the spread. So I wouldn't be running the lay more than 3 touchdowns here with Clemson, knowing the prowess Stanford I think has, and the offense has backdoor potential as well in a game where the number is in this kind of range. So keep that in mind. But the primary look for me is the over here when it comes to Stanford and Clemson. All right.